most beloved of the parables, and it's so important for us, so significant for us, because it describes so much of our lives. I find that as I get older, my perspective shifts on this parable. Whereas at one point I could identify with the younger brother, maybe with the older brother, and then with the father. And as we think about this parable, we see this whole encapsulation of the gospel, this whole encapsulation of the message of Christ, that God is our loving Father, that He has no desire to condemn us, no matter how completely we have offended Him, no matter how completely we believe that we have betrayed God, no matter how we have come to the awareness of our own sinfulness, our own brokenness. You know, think about the parable. The younger son comes to the father and says to him, "Dad, you're good as dead. You know, you might as well be dead. I want my inheritance." And then he goes off and spends it all on prostitutes, which is what prodigal means, essentially. Which is why we also have the epistle reading. And when he spent all of his inheritance on utter and complete selfishness and hedonism, he finds himself impoverished and feeding the swine, which there's not much lower that you can get for a Jew than to feed swine. And so he realizes, well, maybe Dad wasn't so bad after all. Besides, even his employees have plenty of bread to spare, and look at the situation I'm in. Maybe he'll take me back. Of course, he's saying this out of shame, because he realizes that he's completely betrayed his birthright, he's completely betrayed his family, he's completely betrayed his father. And so he rehearses this whole little spiel. "Father, I've sinned before heaven and before you, and I'm not worthy to be your son, but please make me one of your employees. Make me one of your hired servants." But he has no idea, because his perspective is so completely self-centered. And everything he's done in his entire life up until this point, obviously, has been absolutely self-centered. It's all about hedonism. It's all about what he wants. He doesn't care about anyone else or anything else. It's just me, 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 me. And that's the state of our sinfulness. Me, 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 me. It's all about what I feel, what I want. And everybody else is there simply as the instrument for my gratification. This is exactly where our culture is. And no wonder it's such a mess. Because it has no concept. Our culture has no concept of the position of the Father. Sure, the Father must have been rather irritated at first. It's amazing that he actually would divide his wealth and give it to an irresponsible spendthrift kid. But out of love, he did. And even though his trust was in that kid was completely betrayed. Even though that kid regarded him as good as dead. Even though he had shamed himself, he had shamed his family, he had done everything possible to express his rebellion and his own self-righteousness, his own selfishness. I won't even say self-righteousness, his own selfishness. Yet the Father loved him. And undoubtedly every day that he was gone, he would look down the road to see if perhaps his son was coming back. And when he saw his son off in the distance, he ran out to him and embraced him. And the kid couldn't even get out his spiel. He couldn't even get out his, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you, and I'm not worthy to be your son. The Father wouldn't have any of that, because he loved him so much. A love that was far more important than money and possessions and even respect. A love that overcame all sin. And so he ran out to him and he embraced him. And he restored to him the symbols of his sonship. He put a ring on his finger, which means authority. He put the best robe, the best clothing on him. And then he offered sacrifice. The greatest sacrifice in the Hebrew world that you could offer, the fatted calf, in thanksgiving for the return of his son. And obviously, up until his father swept him up and embraced him, the son was oblivious to his father's love. He might have had an inkling, thinking that his father might receive him back as a hireling, but he knew his father had every right, in these very human terms, to be angry and to reject him because of how he had rejected his father. And yet his father embraced him with love. This has been used by the church for centuries and centuries as that ultimate image of repentance. Because repentance is not simply to feel sorry for yourself. It's not at all to feel sorry for yourself. Repentance means to change. And this young man began to come to repentance. It says he came to himself. And he began to realize that he had really messed up. But he was still caught in that very selfish mode of thinking, where he was still unable to comprehend love. The church has always used this as the ultimate image of coming to the monastic life. In fact, the hymns during Matins, one of the most important hymns, "Make haste to open to me thy fatherly embrace. For as the prodigal, I have wasted my life. But in thy loving kindness, purify me of all impurity, cleanse me of all impurity." This is what whether we embrace the monastic life or not, whether we, that's a different story. But every one of us is called to repentance. Every one of us is called to recognize our own prodigality. Every one of us, in one way or another, has sinned and betrayed that great wealth, those riches of love, of mercy, and compassion, and forgiveness that have been given to us. And so as we prepare to begin Lent, and you'll be hearing more about the Prodigal Son, as we prepare to begin Lent, let us think about our own prodigality, how caught up we've been in our own little self-centered worlds, that we might open ourselves up to the love of God. And in opening ourselves to the love of God, open ourselves to the love of our families and of all of those around us, that we too might enter into that fatherly embrace. And enjoy that, and experience that love which cleanses and forgives and raises us up, not only back to our status as it was before, but even more into the heavenly kingdom.